Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Point. I'm Brian Sterling, substituting for Rick Alvin. This week, the battle over tipped wages. The Michigan Senate late this past week approved a bill that amends the timeline of the minimum wage increase ahead of the new law going into effect. There have been growing calls in Lansing to pass the bill to slow down the wage increases and preserve the tipped wage. It's been an issue that has roiled the restaurant industry for months.
This is the life I have chosen for myself, and now with the tip credit being eliminated, my livelihood is at risk.
As it stands, tip workers in Michigan make $4.01 an hour, but they're paid full minimum wage by their employer if their tips don't meet or exceed minimum wage. If nothing changes, starting February 21st, that base pay for tip workers is set to slowly rise until it reaches the standard minimum wage in 2030.
My average is more than half of what they want to pay us at $15 an hour. $15 an hour after taxes is barely going to pay my mortgage. It's not going to pay for food. It's not going to pay for anything.
The change stems from a contentious Michigan Supreme Court ruling last summer that will also see the minimum wage gradually increase to $15 an hour by 2028 and expand sick leave laws, including more leave time for small business employees.
This is something that I don't want to do, but unfortunately, there's no other option. Either we add the fees and raise our prices, or we just close our doors.
But Republicans, business owners, and servers have warned that removing the sub-minimum wage will reduce tip worker earnings, putting jobs and businesses at risk, and driving up prices for customers. Tip workers, they say, will earn less because people will be tipping less. And the workforce is split. Some saying change is needed, others saying leave it alone.
The wage that we're being paid is overly compensated by the tips that we make on a daily basis. And I would appreciate it if we could just, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
There are days where you walk out making $20. You can't force people to come into a restaurant. You can't force them to tip you appropriately.
We start our conversation with Republican State Representative Bradley Slaw from Zeeland. I think about the business community at the point in time when this was all proposed, that they're looking at wage increases, sick time leave. They had just crawled their way out of COVID, and this kind of seemed like a gut punch. Was that something that you were hearing?
Yeah, and that is something that I was hearing, is they were concerned about what is this going to do to us overall, long term. How do we keep from having a problem? Mm-hmm.
Some say, though, without legislative intervention, the hospitality industry and many of these small businesses would face layoffs and business closures in early 2025. Is that a little too dire?
No, I honestly, I don't think so, especially if you look at the paid time off that for sick leave. It's a system put in place that is for really probably a big business. It doesn't really hurt big business because they've got maybe the accountants and stuff to be able to make things happen. But there's going to be mandatory reporting, mandatory tracking of hours down to like quarter-hour increments. This is going to be a struggle for anybody that's a small business to try and make this happen. And then because it allows for the way that it was structured, it allows for people to not call in, not know, or the business owner doesn't know when people aren't going to show up. They don't have to potentially be there for 3 days in a row before they have to do some sort of reporting. Their jobs are protected. This could really damage our small businesses a lot, and I think that closure is definitely not out of the question for some of our small businesses if this stuff were to go through.
When I think about some of those businesses, sticking with that, in a community like Zeeland, talking about after COVID crawling their way back, maybe starting to do a little bit better, then this comes along. I can't think of a more meat and potatoes constituent issue for someone as yourself, trying to respond to some of these issues. I'm just interested in the frequency of, now that people are kind of keyed into what might be happening, are you hearing from your constituents?
Yeah, what's interesting is there's an outcry. Probably right now the people that we're hearing from the most are the servers, waiters, waitresses in restaurants. Those are the folks who are reaching out the most. And I think that maybe part of that is that's got the most fanfare. It's got the most information out about it. That will hurt the employees, but not all employees. The other part of it, I think, is still the business side of that, the paid sick leave. Those folks, many businesses, I don't really realize how impactful this might be if it actually transpires.
I'm curious, what are you hearing from colleagues? I noticed that some Democrats support these measures, including Carol Glanville. She's another West Michigan lawmaker. She voted in support of these bills to send them onto the Senate. This doesn't seem to be falling along partisan lines. A lot of folks on both sides have different opinions about how this would impact constituents in their district.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that we've got different ideas about how it's going to impact. Maybe the severity of that impact, or how big is that impact, that might be the thing that divides us. But it is, I think if you were to talk to all those people and say, okay, what do you really understand this is going to do? I think many of them would say, oh yeah, we've got a problem. This is something we need to fix, which is why they're signed on, which is why it truly is a bipartisan effort. I mean, the tip wage was a 63-47 or something like that, voting for it. So obviously people understand it is a bipartisan issue.
The Senate says they've got some ideas about this. It's pretty likely we're going to see some tweaks. Where do you see an area of compromise there?
Well, I guess I'm not sure where the areas of compromise are, but I think we will see compromise. People will say, oh yeah, this does make sense. We really need to be working on trying to pull this together. So I'm looking forward to having those folks sit around the table, listen to the hearings that are going to go on in the Senate over the next few weeks, and getting this accomplished.
Speaking of the other side of the aisle, many Democrats continue to push these bills, calling on colleagues to vote against them. They raise concerns that these measures could harm workers and their families, enable wage theft, discrimination, poverty. Is that a valid argument in the broad sense?
I guess, Brian, I don't see that. Is it a valid argument that could be raised? Could people be being kept from getting to a higher minimum wage? Potentially, I guess that's possible. Do I really see that? I guess I don't really feel or see that.
How about the contention that workers are struggling with the rising cost of living? Would you at least, folks are having a hard time making ends meet?
Oh, absolutely. And the bill that the House has introduced related to the tip wage, related to a minimum wage. If you track where the Supreme Court decision was and what they had imposed, and where we're at, we're really close, dollars and cents going up for the next couple years, raising that minimum wage. And do I believe that we can raise that minimum wage and actually make a difference for people? Yeah, I think there is a way to be able to do that. What's interesting to me is that what we call a minimum wage used to be called a training wage. You brought people in under a lower rate and said, when they get to the place where they are trained, we will make sure that we're upping their salary appropriately. And I still would like to believe that that's really what it amounts to. It's a training wage, and then we can go from there. Let's help these people get trained, get to a place where they are useful, even more useful to our society, and then let's continue to increase their salary. That's really what we need to be doing, because a minimum wage is hardly a wage that you can live on. So we're at a subsistence level kind of thing when you're doing that. Let's try and get it to a place where it makes more sense.
Well, in fact, the policies proponents, the nonpartisan group, the Michigan League for Public Policy, they talk about this, the livable wages. That all benefits local economies. People are likely to spend their money, even at small businesses. That promotes growth. But is that a reach, I guess, to say that by giving a bigger wage for these tip workers, that's going to lead to that particular outcome?
That might be a stretch. So, but I guess I'm not going to discount that it's not possible. How's that?
Some studies show that states where sub-minimum wages have been eliminated, they still earn their tips. Businesses continue to thrive. Workers take home more money. But that's not the whole story. I think there's a notion sometimes that restaurant owners are making a lot of money It's really a razor thin operation.
And I think you're right, Brian. It's the folks that I talk to that are restaurant owners definitely are working off of very slim margins. It is possible that they're able to move forward, but it is definitely a tough thing for them to do that.
Big Labor tried to make this kind of a cause. They made it an issue, but that doesn't seem to be sticking. What does that tell you just as a lawmaker and Big Labor's relationship, I guess, with their rank and file?
And it's interesting, I think, that the people that came out mostly against this, the Republican ideas of where we were trying to go with this bill, came from out of state. Those folks were not your and my neighbors who came here. They were from some organization outside of the state of Michigan coming in to talk and try and promote what they wanted rather than what we saw as a need for our community. What it tells me about big government or about Big Labor is that I'm not sure that they're really checking with their the folks who are the laborers in there. They're checking with the management or of the labor unions, not necessarily the individuals who are working and making those dollars.
It would seem even from some of the testimony we heard in the House that the workers themselves aren't even on the same page when it comes to whether or not this would benefit them or not.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly true. They don't, I'm not sure that everybody understands it. You know, it's a broader picture. We need to see the full thing. And I'm not sure everybody's had a chance to look at it.
Talk about next steps. It goes to the Senate now. Again, possible tweaks, then back to the House.
Yeah, so
We're going to get this done in time for February 21st.
We certainly hope it will be done in time for February 21st. It goes to the Senate now, first to committee and then on to the floor, hopefully, and then on to the governor's desk. That would be the way we'd like to see it. There obviously will have a chance for there to be some changes, some tweaks to it, so it could easily come back for ratification at the House level. I'm sure that we'll have the votes to be able to make it work.
Would you anticipate a veto from the governor?
Would I anticipate it? The answer is no. And the reason is because I think that if we can get it approved at both the House and the Senate, there's going to be folks on there from both sides of the aisle, and it doesn't make sense for the governor to try and stop things from happening that where businesses are going to be hurt. If small businesses truly start to get hurt like we expected under that paid sick leave, I think the governor's going to hear complaints about it. I'm not sure that the governor really wants that, knowing that you have to be elected, you know, into whatever other role she would like to play into in the future. That would be a really negative thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it begins to take on bigger political implications depending on how long this drags out.
Exactly.
Representative Bradley Sloth, thank you so much for your time.
Well, and thanks for having me in. I appreciate it.
Labor sees the tip wage issue as a workers' rights concern. They say the Republican-sponsored bills could harm workers. We continue on to the point with more on that argument from One Fair Wage Michigan. House Republicans, they have put forth their new tip wage and sick leave bills. How do you categorize these actions to alter this tip wage issue?
Well, I think it's pretty consistent with what Republicans did in the past. The reason we're here is because 6 years ago, voters across Michigan, more than 400,000, collected signatures to raise the wages of workers in Michigan. It was Republicans then that schemed with the business community to prevent it, stalled it out, and as a result of a long proactive legal challenge, we're here today to see the end of February, wages going up for workers finally. The Republicans wanted to lower wages then, and they are trying to lower wages for workers today.
Polling when this was first proposed was overwhelmingly in support of the measure. Is that right?
Absolutely. It was so popular, the Republicans back then didn't want it on the ballot because they knew it would overwhelmingly pass. The good news is that the public overwhelmingly supports raising wages for workers in Michigan. It's long overdue. And recent polling, as of I think it was released even just last week, shows that there's broad bipartisan support for raising wages for workers for those who are at the bottom, first rung, if you will, of the economic ladder here in Michigan.
What about the argument that we hear from the other side that businesses were just, kind of coming out of COVID, just finding their footing again? They were rattled, and the timing of all of this was just really bad that they couldn't absorb it. Is that argument valid?
It's completely invalid. What workers who do the job that's aiding the productivity and the strong economy here in Michigan are the people who are showing up every day, 9 to 5, doing what's expected of them, working the night shift or what have you. The costs of everything have gone up, including the cost to actually just live, rent, food, fuel costs, transportation costs, and it's absolutely ridiculous that we haven't been able to get a meaningful increase in the minimum wage in Michigan, really since 2014.
Again, some say that without this legislative intervention that the Republicans are attempting, the hospitality industry and many say businesses will face layoffs. You could see closures this year. Do you believe in that veracity of that argument?
Absolutely not. It's the same argument that the corporate business industry says every time we have a conversation about raising wages for the lowest earners among us. I'll give you just an example. Everywhere around the country that has seen an increase in the minimum wage, the doomsday scenario hasn't played out. And what I can promise that the day after this gets implemented, which is February 21, the only thing that's going to change is that the people doing the work are going to have a couple extra dollars in their pocket for every hour they work. And what the Republicans in the legislature are talking about doing is actually taking thousands of dollars that these workers could be planning on, that if not touched and not modified, that they're going to make thousands of more dollars this year than they did previously.
Talk a little bit about that, the tipping culture and the wages. You say that even though wages went up in some of these states that passed an ordinance like this, tipping still continued. Talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, again, the gloom and doom scenario that's being cast out there is detached from reality. I'll just name Minnesota, for example, that has had a one fair wage, where the sub-minimum wage, and we call it sub because it's far below what actual minimum wage is, that a lot of those that work in the restaurant industry earn, are they receive tips. In fact, they actually, on an average, it's a greater tipping culture than here in Michigan. Michigan is a tipping state. We tip because of we're rewarding good service, the good experience. No one's going in there tipping thinking that they're paying the base minimum wage for that employee. And so when you look at states that have adopted a one fair wage standard, tipping still happens. And that's why we say that this is about raising the minimum wage, phasing out the sub-minimum wage to equal minimum wage over the next many years, I mean, until the end of the decade, and with tips on top. That if people choose to tip, because there's no requirement that you have to tip unless the restaurant puts it on a party of so many people. I mean, so sometimes you'll see that. But tipping it's generosity. It is a voluntary participation. It's not required, and which is why we believe that all workers should be able to earn a better minimum wage with tips on top.
Read the room for me. I guess in Lansing, you're a former state legislator yourself. If this has passed the House, the Senate now considering it, if it goes on to the governor, do you expect her to sign this bill?
Well, I think you saw in the House that this overwhelming Republican, anti-worker, lower wages, and take paid sick time away from workers is going to hit a brick wall. I mean, I think there's a conversation happening. Policy leaders should have the conversation, but Democrats in Lansing have long stood in supporting raising the minimum wage. They've long stood in making sure that people have access to paid sick time. And I'm confident that the governor is going to stand with the workers in Michigan and celebrate this wage increase that happens come the end of February.
So you're predicting a veto if it gets to her desk?
I don't think that House Republican bill stands a snowflake chance in hell to get to the governor's desk.
Is there room for compromise here, or would you rather just see this measure die?
Well, I would argue that workers in Michigan have been denied a wage increase for the last 6 years. I mean, we've been in court. The voters of Michigan spoke. The Republican leaders back then schemed with a former Republican governor to keep it off the ballot, adopted the law, then tried to gut the law after the election, and now we're here. I think voters in Michigan are fed up with those types of games and deserve the wage increase as it's currently prescribed, and that the Department of Labor in Michigan has communicated to employers this is what the new wage will be for sub-minimum wage, which will be a $2 increase, and the overall minimum wage will increase by $2 as well.
Close observers have noted that the measure that passed the House did have bipartisan support. There are some Democrats jumping on board with this, including some here in West Michigan. Is that distressing? Are they covering themselves politically? What's happening there?
Well, I'd love to have a conversation with them. I think they voted wrong, but I think the real message is the overwhelming majority of the Democratic caucus said no. No to lowering minimum wage for workers and no to taking paid sick time away from workers. And I think that's the clear message. And I think we look to the Democratic leadership in the Senate to stand strong and stand in support of workers and making sure that workers can earn paid sick time.
You said you've been working on this issue for almost a decade.
More than a decade. I worked on these issues when I was in the legislature.
Give me a sense of big labor and the role that they're playing in this, maybe the role they're not playing. Have they been at the table the way that they should here?
I think organized labor representing the people who are fighting for good wages every single day has been very clear. And I welcome their participation. They were supportive of the ballot initiative as we collected the signatures more than 6 years ago. They've been very vocal that we don't lower wages in the state, we raise them, especially for those who are on the front line of the economy. And they've been very strong on that. We don't take away benefits, we increase benefits, like as it relates to paid sick time. And so they've been very vocal, and I appreciate their partnership in this. I think organized labor is really the only collective voice of workers that day in and day out is fighting for workers and working families. And I think they're delivering here. And our success in preventing and holding off a weakening of this the last legislative session and today is a result of their partnership and strong support.
You're satisfied then with the level of participation?
I mean, I always will welcome more, but the president, Ron Bieber of the Michigan AFL-CIO, has been the tip of the spear. He's been with us in this fight at every step of the way, as well as all the other labor affiliates. And so I feel very confident they will stay the path with us and make sure that workers get a wage increase and better ability to earn paid sick time next month.
Michigan League for Public Policy, a nonpartisan group, they say that livable wages benefit local economies. People will spend more money at small businesses like restaurants, promoting growth. Folks on the other side say that might be a little bit of a reach. Make that argument.
I think it's absolutely clear. Ask anyone who works in the restaurant industry, who spends more time in restaurants than they do? Restaurant workers are the best tippers. Restaurant workers with a little bit extra money in their pocket go to other restaurants. I mean, they get off shift and then they go to the place across the street. I think at the end of the day that, and the data of the past, I mean, bears this out, that when there's a little bit more money in the lowest earners of society, that money gets circulating in the economy to pay the bills they have to, and also to be able to partake in the restaurants and entertainment and the opportunity their communities have. And so I believe at the end of the day that restaurants will be stronger for it because more people will be going to it. Families will be able to better meet their needs to be able to survive as prices have gone up. And like I said, Republicans in the legislature cheated workers out of this wage increase 6 years ago, and we're just trying to catch up. And so a $2 increase per hour is more than reasonable to see, and that translates into thousands of dollars more in the pockets of workers.
Dave Woodward with One Fair Wage, Michigan.
Thank you very much.
As of this broadcast, it's understood that the bill will go to the House for consideration. We'll follow the story in the weeks to come. Thanks for watching. I'm Brian Sterling. Join us next time for To the Point.